Embracing devil to derive and declare to the presence of light, it will be the darkness. Illuminated for the shining upon your summer rising summer night. Every moon glow define the direction. The nocturnal condition to seek conversation for the new day with the gratitude coordinating poetic with awakening Reaching them to derive and declare presence of light and be the darkness. Illuminated for the shining upon your summer rising summer night. The moon glow define the direction. The nocturnal condition to seek conversation for the new day with the gratitude coordinating your movement. Significant to the other way for the world has been able to overlook your underlying truth in them. In the life of the sequel to game, there's only a sequel to the place your own shadow and display your attitude with the God to care for the world for the existence for the complicating anything. Regardless of where you are trying to be alone for sun walls. Positive enough for the instance and complicating everything for the understanding of the having got the ability to learn from the statutes and the yellow crawl staff for the student complicated to complex to compare to complete control. Not really understanding anything for the other truth to say about this. Oh, yes, this is no fresh night. Illuminates the darkness and control of that embrace your the left off of the sun to come back. That's a good word for you to find the beginning for the end of the stars and have to guide a good community. Far out enough for the stranger response and complete the stranger help with the responded of the content. Attention contemplated the confidence and the door for the enough for the good. Should turn your cheeks and so we got to reach out to the maintaining what's up in the place. As for the culture of the bargaining chair, once again for the mission to call it something and give Kevin Patrick and the ship should rise. Able to overlook your underlying truth in them. They should have life for the sequel to game for the song. The sequence of the complicating everything, not understanding anything regardless to where you stand for. You say you place your own shadow. Display your attitude with the thought to care for the world for existence and complicating anything. Regardless of where you are trying to is in control, and never they place in the embrace the earth that left off of the sun to come back. That's a good word for the beginning for the end of the stars and never time. For out of the strange response, for your heaven, and spine of the conscience. Did you contemplate for this? For the never living.
Keeping us distracted while it's
attraction and unexpected travel and picture for the distance of the fell in love with the feeling of the falling. You can have that for the feels of better, but enough for the falling. Steve with the dream of the brand new falling. You can make a brand new partner for the partner. Blue eyes and there's a zip, but you can definitely
locked in a death, the balance taking its toll. When I am is what makes us whole. Listen to me.
the innocence and outcome. Ignorance you ran the rate, irrational and great. I have found the ratio to fit for the bending of any so you can take it away. To face what you understand. Looking like a smiley man for the service to create it in currency. Drowning at the training and emotions. You can't see but sees the shine. You see for seals to find the sealing the secrets of the seduction. Sacrament for the capital of golden state with the minor treasures that will by the eye of the virus. Kill the map, the seekers and the riching. Currencies for the loom, the curriculum. Circulating not for the orbit, the dummy and king. Over your painful emotions and numbing and after the adding of the letters to define the numbers to enable somebody. To find the bend with the table with the multiplications and find the power to preside perceptions. Prescribe some scripture to negate for that for the literature, for the litter, for the trash talk you waste. Pleasure, who will find please such a question for nutrients and better to die for the deity, for the decency, for the you could decide upon your choice. Moon and sun, Sabbath to the mandate. Beginnings for beggars, a week for the weak to hunger pains. No food for thought to eat for the planting of gardens, or plant-based deprivation upon your growling, growing pains, and not to ache the heart for beating yourself for the death for the any civil rights in case and you can find in the status, stealing for the integrity for the catching and pleading of blood for the savings account, accountability for the blood banks, creative fraud of frowning after the befroze, the love of the hair for the being called a nigga, for the flow out of your mouth like an ignorant river, the Nigeria for the inferior, the patriarchy for the restricting, the stand for the new single mark, and the question that for the conundrum over your head till you beat the love for the dread the violence. Vibes, victimize yourself, you try to tell you the ill, you can't believe that for the lie, but enough for the paid attention, for the you can find it in the day for the determined, for the detriment, for the described, to be scribbled, to be read, because over the safe, to be given shot for this, and be misfired and rest and misled. Deceiving, conceiving, before you leaving, coming out of shoreline again. When you don't know if that was coming and going, for the tide is hot enough for the go for the full moon, for the determined enough for the deterred, minor this and the missing hurt. Mish, because the sheep follow for the voice of the herd, they're straight up for the slaughter and for the section, the age of the sausage to be other white meat, chicken. Get your heart enough to pump the hormones, fear for the will and love, and the cock in the morning. And the sun rises up in the morning, you're running over the side for the hide, to be behind the shadow of the life of the deceived with you couldn't find it if you had a way. Find the lost footnotes to seek the right, so this would be the right to take and the left for the right, the hope to the over the forsaken for the taking the time, the mind, the furlong for the future, the inspired the aspirations design. This illusion concluding your expedited for the inverting, the ongoing and hollow for the dense and first attraction to be seen as forgotten, that barter for the statement for the announcement that it constitutes this unnecessary information. At least you have the engagement to the addressing of the graph for the interest in mediocre principles in exchange for one's gratitude for the judgments added to the concluding order. Plenty fish and got sea. Plenty fish and got sea. Shells will appear, then disappear like it was a swim in the warm water for the beautiful sting you find the tides to bring me ashore. Determining all what you want for the moon to do what it want to listen against the times for the wash it toss you back to the fore for the lesson for the learn for the birdie proceeding for receding your recessions for the questions you no answer emotionally confused. Giving up on what you find and dissipate for the awakening of the sun for the light for the control. Your core correlate for the fate to the fatigue, and you're for the predator for the premature for the nature of your natural for the wonder for the flares and solar rays. Sting those devils ray and the waits for the underneath the floor. Sure for this the way the dream escape for the scope of the watching of the dreamers and kind of near. You to find us the judge now for advocate. Grow to be absolved to the surprise and confused and able to repeat the act as always to first to cast the rope thing. Plenty fish and got sea. Shells will appear, then disappear like it was a swim in the warm water for the beautiful sting you find the tides to bring me ashore. Determining all what you want for the moon to do what it want to listen against the times for the wash and toss you back to the fore for the lesson for the learn for the birdie proceeding for receding your recessions for the questions or no answer and emotionally confused. Giving up on what you find and dissipate for the awakening of the sun for the light for the control. Your core will correlate for the fate to the fatigue, and you're for the predator for the premature for the nature of your natural with the wonder for the flares and solar rays. Sting those devils ray and at the waits for the underneath the floor. Sure for this await the dream escape for the scoping of the watching of the dreamers and kind of near. Herb with you to find us a touch and now for advocate. Pro to be absolved so the surprise and confused and able to repeat the act as though it was to first to cast the rope is being done for the whole way played. The sincerest is soon to find a seer. Start for the world with a Broadway for the broadcast and the period after the Mediterranean and meditation and prayer for the pause. You find a Paul to parent falls. Display the displays for the vanishing without a trace of the face of the disintended. Lacing this will make you make or break a leg for this will be the rhyme and rain of the which you can find a way for the already from the hand. This will be the helping. Distress and beauty for the dress. The implement for the impressive irony to give a system for the distance for the what you see for the direction. Please. They encompass the encompass of the compassion, the complaints and campaign for the painting and pictures and fate. Calamity for the calmness and the confusion you can find it. Infuse and that for the illusion for the never to see the conclusion for the outcome. Interlude and landing for the shoulder to lean and find an eye for tower for the standing still. Bad posture for the dictator for the predicament for the disputed leading and bad intentions for the never intended for the tender heart. Eyes that are blind, but they keep the bird before they see behind her for the beginning to find the converting of bliss and this to be the ignorance trance to move and find emotion rhythm to the dance and dance out of the moonlight for the soul. It was only celebratory for the pre-thought. Scientists, laboratories, elaborate. Wait that you can dig the act, that for the fetus, for the fed up, and for the misleading, the pen for the no ink, for the dark, for the no ink, and thought. I think that this be ignorant enough for the weak eyes that behold that beauty. Without a grip to slip with the hands for that, the time to find the heart for this, the openness, a handle for the ajar, the door to open the shut, to that for the seal, for the sea, for the illustrator, for the sea, the illness, and the illness, and for the illusion, for the you can find and never to find a read. Illiterate for the high rate to the illness, and the radar, or the silver blade for the snake, for the bite to death, for the trauma. You can find the forsaken with the sake, the idea for the intentions. Campsites, no tense and tantalizer for the tensions and traumatic and transient transition for the position and train the plane to not define its season. Hide the indecency for the decisive, indecision for the indicted, for the disobedient edited, for the virgin, for the indecent to the complacency. Complaining you're simply being a sample, the ample, the ample, the camper, the compromising, no pleasure for the plea. What's the outset for the inset for the infant, infiltrate for the eye for the feeling of the rape for the tyrant. Anticipating the pain for the pats, the back, the paid, the back, the pond, the payback for the paid for the previous mistake. Your attack, and that's the stake down for the place of the long for the waiting for the scale to matter. Faith of the world, you carry that out like a belly dance with the romance for the movie that come to here for the before the outcome. You can find the intake 2, take 3, for the cutting action, for the container, for the complete Completion agenda for the regardless of your gender. For the gentleman, that you can find our hardest way through the gentle. That for the deserving for the deserts, this will be dry enough for the just look of a decent, delivered, depleted. Diplomat that has of that hate, but the air for the diplomacy for the idiots, an idea for the who become no memory, then no idea for another ideology for the idiots, and to see that for the cause of the fact, of the dreamers. Wait for seeing the first off for the forgetting the loss of the memo to the memory of the morons. The lunatics.
Plenty fish and got seas. Plenty fish and got seashells would appear, then disappear like there was a swim in the warm water for the beautiful stinky. Plenty fish and got seashells would appear, then disappear like there was a swim in the warm water for the beautiful stinky. You find the tides to bring you ashore. Determining all what you want for the moon to do what it want to this against the times for the wash to toss you back and forth for the lesson for the learn from the bird proceeding for preceding your recession. I'm glad you made it, but who's made it? Aren't you stoked for the making of who's made? Was it who the made for the who was the name for the be married for the maiden for the last name for the first love for the true medicine for the square roots of the garden for the even though it was a doubt for no longer that she came short misquinterted for the misproportion report the adoption opt to the operation the imperative aggravated for the alleviated for the eyes dilated for the heart to be considered for the amputated for the alleviate the pain for the treasure box and purchase for the chest box and chastised and dehydrated for the baptized and raptured to no limits and captures arising in the mornings of the day for the answer yesterday's gestures unless you're best for the investor for the destroying the future like testicles for the testifying the birth of the day for the distant earth for the dirt dome leads to the evidence for the Holy Spirit for the ground dug and set for the sight for the die for the life for the sacrifice and who to find the sacred scare for the day for the forefathers and fear arrive for generous pronouns and Robert that for the pronounced unidentifiable for the like of the announcements tantalize the crowds of the rouse of the arrogant negligent for the tangents and the jensen not yet for the boom for the ava like the beginning of the alphabet for the not the alpha yet Betas is the screams boots the marker speaks that for the weeping and the wet for the lazy prayers of that for the superhero for the biblical action figures that for the wet for the weep she counting sheep with this asleep with wild shepherd's eyes to meet the match made the internet for the that was caught by the inmates restricted for the mating no master for no baiting for the depth for the deprivation for the depressed the recession for the recently recessed and the receiving the investment adventures of that for the add up and the ads and up this for the addition for the dictions and jurisdiction for the jurisdiction to describe that for the dictionary for the additive for the direction of deposit or disposition dictated for the described to that performer raising pharmaceuticals for they were surely suitable enough to be dressed up for the to be the dressing to the denounced denoted by the denomination for the dominant for the domain for the doorman for the doorman for the adoration for the heart that was adorable for the deplorable for it was reputable but enough repudiated surprised to suppress succeeding and leading for the leadership to be sinking in for the thinking and leaky leaks and disappointing eyes at least the lies and spies to this spies the spectators for the specifically specified crusader for the crusading and the crucified crush your lies for the rest of the room for the off the chest of the fate reason for the let's meet the two judgment the admit for the minute over the deep for the anonymous for the free will for the anonymous find a breath of this is heaven while waiting for the exhale free willy for the free dental care for the free wonky willy for the this will be the what you want for the circumstantially circumcised circulated for the circumvented system for the this will be the enough for the aggravated for the sexual GMO aggravated to the making go okay for the equation for the middle earth and the middle for the middle ground for the middle east and the midnight for the mid-air for the middle man for the medieval I can find a disguise and I mean the medieval I can find a medieval renegade renegotiate for the renaissance and the rancid answer death for the ram repeated enough for the war for the die for the man for the grind for the matter for the man he answers survived through the archives and argent rivals and the bride for that for the arrogant for the rave for the Aryans and like the crayons and this for the battle for the good for the eons and irony for the iron needs and nail for this to be the only thing you feel poetic with a wicked
and easy but I can find it never to miss the disagreement
to derive to declare
I'm glad you made it but whose
presence of light
made it
then be the darkness
aren't you stoked
illuminated
for
for the shining
making
upon your
who's
summer rising summer night under the moon's glow defining direction the nocturnal condition to seek compensation for the new day with the gratitude coordinating your movement significant to the other way for the world has been able to overlook your underlying truth and the foundation of life for the sequel to game for this only a sequence of defined term patterns. Scatterbrain. The man had a wife that couldn't keep complicating everything and not understanding anything regardless to where you stand for the beside you place your own shadow with all. You display your attitude with they thought to care for the world for the existence for the complicating anything. Regardless of where you are trying to truth to find a trust to be alone for the sun won't shine in me. Positive enough for the instance in complicating everything for the understanding regardless of ever the dearly departed for the having not been deported for the border for the statues and come behind the curtain. Moon catching suntans this body has craters too. Deep to yellow cross there for the still too complicated and complex to compare to complete to control your content for the control. Comfortably come for. Confine and not really understanding anything for the although you find the truth to say that this will be again without complicating. Oh, I guess this is the first night you gave me love for the releasing of the unwanted desire. No. We're gonna find every beat critical but enough of the behavior that you can find after the beating of people.